Old people seem to love demonizing the new hip trends and using them as scapegoats for various perceived problems. Metal music being blamed for the satanic panic being the most blatant and obvious example. People were so desperate to blame metal music for corrupting their child's minds, to the point they would literally play songs backwards looking for subliminal messaging, pointing out anything that vaguely sounded like a devil word as proof.
He's got a point, hasn't he, Mr. Maloney? I don't know many people who do play records backwards in order to decipher the words.
With Queen, there was this religious right group claimed that Another One Bites the Dust, played backwards, says, decide to smoke marijuana. Now you try it.
It's fun to smoke marijuana.
Of course, that didn't prove anything. People just wanted a scapegoat and parents maybe didn't know what else to blame. A similar debate has arose around video games. It should be apparent to anyone under the age of 40 that there is nothing wrong with playing video games in adulthood. It's a hobby not unlike any of the countless things adults choose to spend free time on. But before I continue to point out the obvious, I think it's important to acknowledge the understandable roots of this stigma. The majority of video games are constructed with children and adolescents in mind. There is literally decades worth of marketing that gives parents the impression that this is just kid stuff. And let's face it, any art that isn't considered high art has a stigma of being frivolous, a time waste, or juvenile. The first argument that always comes up in this topic in favor for adults playing video games is that it's not all that different from TV and movies. Saying one is childish and the other isn't is ridiculous. It totally is, but let's just go over the common counter-arguments real quickly. TV is a passive intake of information, while video games are akin to a toy, because interaction is involved. And because it doesn't require physical exercise, it's not physically healthy like sports. It's an active distraction that's easier to fall into because it requires your undivided focus to progress. This argument falls flat on its face because not only is TV addiction a thing, and in fact is believed to make up 5 to 10% of the US population, but the obvious rebuttal to the it's a toy mentality is, so what? My mother likes puzzles. Puzzles are as much as a toy as video games. Is it bad for adults to play puzzles? To play chess? Collect figurines, stamps, model trains, painting? Now of course you can make separate cases for why these hobbies aren't as poisonous as video games or whatever, but then you have to abandon the toy argument entirely, because it could be applied to countless popular hobbies. The next set of arguments are about mental health. Now there are countless anecdotes of people both young and old claiming that video games have helped their mental health, or have helped them make connections and friends through the medium. I'd recommend a video from a channel called Food for Dogs, where a kind elderly woman talks about her experience getting into gaming. It's wholesome as heck and very sweet, link in the description. But again, let's steelman the other side and ignore these anecdotes. Instead, I'll just dump a bunch of links to articles saying video games are okay or beneficial to mental health in the description, and read off some of my favorite bits. Video games provide connection, a critical aspect of mental health. Feeling like you are part of a community or like-minded people who value your participation and share your goal within the game. Video games tend to be more affordable and accessible than traditional mental health services, which may help more people get essential care. Video games lead to healthy brain stimulation. In other words, playing video games forces players to deeply simulate multiple different areas of his or her brain, which leads to the development of a large handful of various beneficial tasks and dimensions of thinking. Game creators have in recent years begun portraying mental illness in games in more thoughtful and less stigmatizing ways than past mediums. Those include Hellblade's Senua's Journey, whose main character struggles with psychosis, Celeste, about a quest of a girl who has anxiety to climb a mountain, that's a really great game by the way, you should all play it, and Psychonauts, about a boy who projects himself into other people's mental worlds and helps them fight their demons. Now of course there are possible downsides to your mental health as well. After all, video game addiction is still possible. And hey, maybe all these articles were written by hack frauds who are just coping and desperately trying to defend their hobby. You can probably find as many articles condemning gaming as you can advocating for it. After all, anyone can find a source for anything up on the internet, everything's here. So here, I'll dump links to the first handful of articles I found that believe games are bad for mental health. Feel free to read them, but that brings me to another quote. Like all things, it's about moderation. Excessive gaming can take a toll on your mental and physical health, just like how too much running can lead to joint problems and impact injuries. There's always a slippery slope, always a bad way to go about a hobby or media, always a way to go too far. But just because there's a possible bad side doesn't mean it should be condemned. Maybe you disagree, but most people wouldn't. That's the kind of society we live in. And here is where I out myself as an absolute straight edge and rant about alcohol. Here's a question. In what kind of backwards, ridiculous, illogical world would we believe that adults shouldn't play video games, but alcohol is okay? And not just okay, but an essential business during a global pandemic. If hobbies or tastes that can lead to downsides are considered immature and unfit for adults, then alcohol should be the #1 target of ridicule. Alcohol is hundreds of times worse for your mental and physical health than video games ever could be, not to mention more addictive. Heck, some people literally die from drinking too much. Drunk driving, overdose, domestic violence. Alcohol is provably more dangerous to fully developed adults than video games are to children. And that's even assuming video games are dangerous to begin with. Which they really aren't. Even from an economic point of view, it's more irresponsible because alcohol can easily cost you way more than playing video games. And the physical withdrawal symptoms and addictive nature of it arguably makes it harder to quit. But of course, I don't want to look down on people for drinking alcohol. It has its upsides and its downsides, and everyone who participates accepts that. I myself don't drink alcohol every time I'm offered, but sometimes I do, and I can admit it tastes nice. It's easy to see why people like it, and I don't want to insult people who drink alcohol responsibly. When the US tried to prohibit alcohol on large scale, in an attempt to reduce crime and improve mental health, the literal opposite happened, and it increased crime and caused protests marching. We don't condemn people for drinking alcohol because it's a natural activity. Lots of people like it, so we accept it and try to moderate it. Video games are similar in that a significant of the population like it, but it's a heck of a lot less dangerous than alcohol. Maybe gulping down a pint is more cool and adult-like than rolling around at the speed of sound, but I feel enough adults play and accept games for me to not worry about that. To finish off, I want to put my foot down and say video games are art and they can be emotional, thought-provoking outlets for creative expression and consumption. The games themselves and the industry behind it is worth analyzing, critiquing, and discussing. But more importantly, it's fun and engaging. Sonic Adventure 2 is art, and that's an undeniable fact. Contrary to idiots' belief, you don't need incredibly deep themes or some avant-garde narrative meaning to be art. And even then, plenty of games have exactly that. The definition of art, whatever it is going to include things you don't like. Are you going to tell me the people responsible for Sonic Adventure 2's graphics, skyboxes, models, animation, music, coding, physics engine, AI design, level design, voice acting, writing, directing, and everything else were not artists collaborating on a project that had a massive impact on pop culture and the people who played it? If you think not, then I can't think of a better word than ignorant or silly to describe your narrow perception. But hey, I'm just a 21-year-old gamer boy, so maybe I'm dumb. But if you think I'm smart, like and subscribe.
That wasn't so hard.